Sut I yfad Matango, I mola meic a mola Eric. Gwyn ei byd y beirdd o Gymru canis hwy a brofant Matango, bendith feunyddiol y balmwydden. Pan ddaw Mair yn gwybysal yn ei siwt ar gefn o cada a'r botal 5 litr yn ei gôl, gwir pawb fod heilioni am lifo. A gwyn ei byd y beirdd o Gymru pan fo'r calabash cyfoes hwn yn glanio'n drwm ar ganol bwrdd dwmp, canis hwy a ryfeddant at ei gynnwys blithiog. Byrlymai'r sig ryfeddol hwn fora heddiw yng nghoed y Mair, cyn dringo ei was y decllath i'w brig i'w dapio a chyn ei ddyrym o'r awyr ei weithio'n wirod yn syth. Ond cyn ei flasu, rhaid dilyn y ddefod. E muta e jani mawilu, a jani e linge iawotani, a ddyco gnau cola gerbron a ddwg fendith bywyd yn ei sgil. Ac o bocad, siwt y Mair daw cneuan cola. Mae'n ei rannu'n ddarn I bawb o gwmpas bwrdd cyn tywallt rhyw lymad i'r llawr, fel bo'r hynafiaid yn tywys ein trafod. A dim ond wedyn gall y Mair lenwi cwpan pob un. A gwyn ei byd y beirdd o Gymru, a gwyn ei byd y beirdd o Gymru, pan brofant Matango, am fod cymdeithas ym mhob calabash. Ac wrth i'r yfad a'r trafod a mestyn y pnawn daw eraill atom. Mae'r botel yn wahoddiad I fforddolion fwrw llwch at lôn o'i traed ac ymuno'n y seiat. Cymryd llymaid yn y cysgod a rhannu doethineb y dydd. A chawn gnoi ar chwerder y gneuan nes i'r Matango ei ddilysu. Erbyn noswylio, a'r botel a'r wagio down at yr ymbindico, y waddod. A rhaid I ddyfarnu i'r hynaf o'n plith, am y bydd yn rhoi llaeth yn ei gŵd. A gwyn ei byd, a gwyn ei fyd yr henfardd hwn o Gymro, canis e fe a brofodd yr ymbindico, ac e fe a nerthwyd yn ddirfawr ganddo.
Hello Ifor. If I may, I'd like to ask you a few questions for Just Another Poet. If I may ask, when did you first realise that you were a poet?
I'm not sure if I am. That's partly because in Welsh there are several words for poet. Prydydd is the sort of workaday catch-all term for people who work with metre and rhyme and rhythm, and I think anybody who puts in a bit of applies himself can be a prydydd. But bardd, again meaning poet, but that's a sort of cut above. A bardd is if we were to stick strictly to the meaning of the word, we should really say there are only one or two bards or beirdd in a generation. So to call yourself a bardd, a poet, in that respect is perhaps a little bit what's the word? Presumptuous. But but these words are used, and of course I'm going on about the subtle distinctions in the Welsh language, which is not so pertinent in this context. I first got interested in writing poetry when I was in primary school in London. That was in English, obviously. They didn't have anybody who could mark it in Welsh. And then I began writing lyrics for a band I was involved with when I was in my 20s. I soon realised that my talents perhaps lay not in the world of singing, and it sort of branched out from there. But in that respect, I suppose that the performance has always been the performance element of poetry, which is not an essential part of poetry, but can be a valuable part of poetry. That's always been a significant element in how I think of poetry.
obviously you grew up in London, so what impact did that sort of early experience sort of of London and having Welsh-speaking parents around you have on your subsequent sort of development as a parent, if anything?
Well, the fact that my parents brought me up to speak Welsh is why I write in Welsh, because my father was brought up in London as well, and my grandmother was also brought up in London. So, seeing as that the family has been in London since 1886, and they all trouble to pass it on to the next generation, it would seem impertinent of me not to embrace the language and to use it to express myself. But I don't know how in what other ways it's influenced me. It's always difficult to answer something like that. It's particularly when people say, "Oh, well, what was that like compared with being brought up in Cardiff, say, or being brought up in in a more rural setting in Wales?" Well, of course, you can never really answer that because you weren't brought up there. So, I've never really, I had family who lived in rural areas of Wales, in Ceredigion. I had family who lived in sort of industrial, or what were in the process of becoming post-industrial areas in northwest Wales, the quarrying areas there. So, it wasn't that I was a complete fish out of water. I mean, I had a, and that's one of the advantages of being brought up in the Welsh diaspora in London. You're never that far from your roots. Whereas, if I've been brought up, within, say, the Gujarati diaspora, my father's partner, actually, my father's an accountant, and he's one of his business partners for many years was a Gujarati, and I remember being stunned to learn that he, at the age of whatever he was then, in his 40s, was going to visit Gujarat for the first time, because he'd been brought up in Uganda and then had come to London, or the London area, and so this was his first time going to. I found that sort of mind. But of course, that was natural for him. So it was. We were fortunate in that we lived close enough. Even though we were in London, we were able to visit Wales twice a year. So that that kept it real, I suppose. That the language wasn't just some weird thing that my parents thought I should do. I saw that it had a real context, and that I saw that there were places that I visited on my holidays that where it was the normal medium of life, of all interaction, all social interaction.
What would you say have been the most enriching experience for you during your tenure as the National Poet of Wales?
It seems invidious to single anything out, because there've been so many wonderful experiences, and if I had to sort of encapsulate it in a sentence, then I'd say that the variety is the most enriching thing. The chance to work with people from all walks of life. As part of the Durga Puja festival in Caerphilly, or Penrhaw, I think we were. I've also done a session in Berwyn prison in Wrexham. I'm currently working on a program to promote awareness of cancer research amongst people in Key Stage 3, young people in Key Stage 3. What else? Recently I wrote a set of poems to be carved, that have been carved into waymarking stones that appear alongside the A470 in the Brecon Beacons National Park. I've worked with what my mother used to call school phobics. I'm not sure what the official term is now. People who have a tendency to play truant. yeah, so I hope that sort of suggests that there's been a variety of opportunities which I've all embraced eagerly, and I'm very grateful to Literature Wales for the opportunity so to do.
So carrying on from the theme of being the national poet, how do you see the contemporary poetry scene in Wales, and what do you like the most about it?
I think one of the most encouraging things about it is that it's quite a young scene, or at least there are young people coming through. There's never been a point where I've felt I still seem to be, even at my sort of ever advancing years, I never felt that, there don't seem to be any people coming up behind, as it were. So that I think would be the single thing that's most encouraging. That there is a continuity, and we have it's such a long and rich poetic tradition stretching back 1500 years. Obviously it began in a very different place, praising the feats of warriors and their generosity, mourning them when they passed on, and yet some of those elements are still present in Welsh poetry to this day. Perhaps not praising feats in battle, but certainly poems are used. Poems are written to give thanks for something. It might be something quite mundane, to mark special occasions, birthdays, weddings, etc. It's still very much part of the social fabric in Wales, and I think that poets in Wales are perhaps more, I would venture, perhaps slightly more socially engaged than perhaps their counterparts in other neighbouring parts of the world. I say that very tentatively because I've just said you can only really speak with confidence about your own experience. But I think that's something we can be proud of. And from social engagement, then hopefully comes an element of political engagement. I think it's important that we take responsibility for making our own media here in Wales. I think we're often poorly served by the media here in Wales. In one poem I described Wales as a vampire nation, not because of any blood-sucking propensities in us, but one of the characteristics of the vampire is it looks in the mirror and it doesn't see anything. And I often feel we in Wales, we look in the mirror of the British media in particular, and where are we? We're not there. You have to, even at this time of COVID, with where there are different rules and different policies being enacted, you have to sort of look around to try and find out, so what's relevant to us. That's one particular thing, but and it's not just a case of making our own media to better serve our interests in the here and now. I think another important thing we need to do is to engage with our history, the good bits and the bad bits. It's currently Black History Month, and that's a wonderful thing. But it's why just a month? This should be happening all the time. And similarly, although in an allied sense, we need a greater awareness of our own history in Wales, incorporating the history of all the citizens of Wales.
Well, because you've touched on the Black History Month, I wonder if I may ask you a question about sort of your trip to Cameroon as part of the Three Mullahs. Eric Gengale Charles, who sort of instigated that project, he talks about that literary bridge. I wonder what it means to you as the national poet of Wales and sort of the champion of Welsh literature.
The role of National Poet of Wales, which of course is something instigated, a project instigated by Literature Wales, is twofold. The sort of the most obvious, the most apparent element of it, perhaps, is you're expected to write poems that are commissioned to mark various occasions of national significance, be they happy, sad, historical, in the present, and there's a great deal of latitude with that. You can engage with all kinds of subjects. It's quite open-ended and all the more stimulating because of that. However, there's also an ambassadorial role, and I've had the opportunity to visit a number of countries during my tenure, and with all these visits, people say, "Oh, that must be wonderful." It's a bit of a jolly, isn't it? You're going off to these different countries. Well, potentially it could be that, but the responsibility is to engage with people when you're there to build bridges. So to talk about it a bit more in general, a lot of it involves, prepare before you go, who you're going to meet. Use your time effective when you're there, but then follow up when you come back. So it's not just a sort of one-off. I went to Lithuania, that was it. You come back with, you have context which you can share back here. Hopefully there's the opportunity to bring people back to Wales, or for other people to go to other countries. It's not just a one-off thing. And so to come to the specific example of Cameroon. Eric is a man on a mission, and has already notched up a number of significant steps in this sort of bridge building exercise. Our visit to Cameroon in whatever it was, October 2018, was just one step in that journey. It wasn't the be all and end all. Prior to that, of course, he's published the anthology, the Wales Cameroon anthology, Hiraeth yr Oli Roli. Subsequent to our visit, and one likes to think perhaps partially helped by the visit, there's been a return visit by Iestyn Tyne and Leo Maddox, sponsored by I'r Gobaith Cymru. Iestyn Tyne was the winner of the chair. And as part of his prize, got to visit the Young Writers Festival in Cameroon. Of course, the next big step will be to bring writers from Cameroon here to Wales. These things are no good if it's all one-way traffic, because otherwise there's no real dissemination going to happen. Mike Jenkins and I can only say so much about what we learnt in Cameroon. How much the better to have someone like Eric, who of course is a great spokesperson for Cameroon here in Wales. But hopefully we can build on that yet further.
So in terms of your own writing, who would have been the great influences, in whom you find inspiration when it comes to writing poetry?
I think one of the, okay for exposure. I think one of the biggest influences on my writing, on my poetry, as would be the case for many poets who write in Welsh, is traditional metre. The cynghanedd, the system of alliteration and internal rhyme that must be applied to every line that you write. However you combine those lines together, and to explain it very simply, because it is quite simple to explain. Cynghanedd essentially falls into three different types. There's one type of cynghanedd involves internal rhyme. The penultimate syllable in the rhyme must rhyme with a preceding syllable. So, for instance, is this bard from Cardiff? The ard in bard rhymes with the ard in the penultimate syllable, which is Cardiff. Is this bard from Cardiff? The second kind of cynghanedd involves alliteration. And I have to think of an example now.
While you are thinking, one of my favourite poets, Gerard Manley Hopkins,
yes,
very
of course,
influenced by Cynghanedd.
The second kind of cynghanedd involves alliteration. All the consonants in the first part of the line must alliterate in the same order with the consonants in the second part of the line. So, to give you an example, to right verse, eat root veg. So T, to right verse, T, R, T, V, to right verse, eat root veg, T, R, T, V. To right verse, eat root veg. It's not a particularly inspiring line, but it illustrates the point. The third and final kind of cynghanedd is a combi cynghanedd involving both alliteration and internal rhyme. So, as an example, in fact, this is an advertising slogan, because advertisers sort of cotton onto this thing. What makes something euphonious and memorable, which of course was the whole point of cynghanedd in the first place. Make fish your dish of the day. So the ish in fish rhymes with the ish in dish, but the D at the beginning of dish also alliterates with the D at the beginning of day. Make fish your dish of the day. So that's cynghanedd. Cynghanedd is really quite simple to explain. It can be its principles can be employed in English, and as you said earlier, of course it was an influence on the writing of Gerard Manley Hopkins. I believe Thomas Hardy also dabbled with it at some point, and people have argued to no great purpose, I think, was Dylan Thomas influenced by cynghanedd? Maybe he was and maybe he wasn't, but it's certainly been an influence on me. Even though I tend to write in blank verse rather than formal cynghanedd, but I like to use touches of it in a sort of more freewheeling kind of way.
The last question would be, are you working on any particular kind of writing at the moment?
I hope to bring out a collection of poems next year. I've with my various national poet duties, I've banked up a fair number, and I'm also working on a factual project. It's a kind of exploration of the life of a young soldier who died in the First World War in 1916, but he left an extensive collection of letters, which are the basis for the book, and also the basis for a set of travels I did. I followed his footsteps to all the places that he visited, both as he was from Ceredigion. He went to study in Aberystwyth. He enlisted from there and was trained in Gwyll, in Winchester, before he went to the front. He also did some training in Camberley, and so visited his family in London, which was particularly resonant for me. So I hope that will appear next year as well.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And there we can conclude the interview.